All right, we'll get started and other folks might come in. My name is Jim Glickman, and I'm a C4 member, C4 being the Colonial Coin Collectors Club. We joke that some of us collect colonial currency, so it really should be 5C, Colonial Coin and Currency Collectors Club. But in any event, we're sponsoring this talk today, Collecting American Colonials 101. And it's designed for, really for anybody, but especially for folks like yourself that maybe just has a few colonials and just getting their feet, dipping their feet into the waters, or maybe they haven't yet and they're just wondering about it. And really, the reason we have the program is there's a little bit of a learning curve with colonials. And all of us, I've been collecting colonials since probably about 2002 or 2003, and we all had to go through a period where I found it exciting. We had to learn, we had to discover, and a lot of stuff you don't know. So we're trying to make it easier and more inviting for folks that are thinking about colonials to tell them stuff that maybe we wish some people told us when we were beginning. So let's get going. Before we get started, I'm just going to show a little eye candy. I'm going to do this throughout the presentation, just show a couple of cool coins, but no other reason that they're cool and they kind of whet your appetite. So it says one of Leo's favorite. Leo Shane is another member of our club. He's our club librarian, and he put this together with me. So this is a 1787 Fujio cent that we'll talk about a little bit later in the talk. It's one of the many types of colonial coins that we collect avidly and we're very interested in. Designed by Benjamin Franklin. It's a really cool coin. So we start off with the question, what are American colonials? And we're gonna have a series of slides here asking a series of questions, and I'll get to eventually maybe give some answers, but we're gonna start off with a bunch of questions that people normally ask when they start to look at either catalogs or on the bourse for, start to look at colonials and notice the wide variety of things that people consider under the tent of American colonials. So the first question people ask, well, when were they made? Is it stuff that goes back to the very first settlers coming to North America, very first Europeans, non-native people coming to North America to try to settle it? Some people think, well, it's up to when the Constitution was founded, and that's a boundary line. Some people may think, well, it's only before the first federal mint opened in 1792. But yet, there's some coins commemorating George Washington that were after that time. So there's a number of different time frames or boundaries that you could say, well, this is a colonial and this is not. What are American colonials? What constitutes something that we would say, well, this is something that's a colonial and this is not? We have some Spanish silver here, so-called pistarine. We have a variety of things on this slide. Again, a Fujio cent like we saw on the previous slide. In the bottom right, so-called Washingtonia, a whole series of coins and tokens, really tokens and medals, I should say, commemorating George Washington. Is that something? And some of those were even after the mint was opened. So are those involved? Here on the top right, here's a piece of continental currency. The Continental Congress issued paper money for various reasons involving the economics of the time. And each of the 13 colonies, each of the 13 later called states, issued their own money, their own paper money. Are those included? Again, we talked about when they were made, what are the different things that form the variety of things that people collect, where they were made. So, different people have different ideas. Some people want things that were, made in North America, things that were printed here if it's paper money, or things that were minted here. And maybe they think of that's their conception of American colonial, because it was made here to circulate here. Then you have things that may have been made in Europe, or maybe South America or Central America, that in fact did circulate in North America. Or another variant is things that were made in places other than North America, specifically with the intent to circulate in North America. So there's all these kind of twists as to what do I consider part of American colonials. There were private enterprise, businesses that saw the need for species, saw the need for circulating coinage, saw that merchants and people didn't have enough, and there were some private enterprises that struck coins that circulated in North America. Some we know a lot about, some we don't really know much about at all. But we know they exist because we see them in collections, we see them in dealers' cases, we see that they were worn, we see they were circulated. We may not know a lot about it because some things have much more documentation than others. But they're part of the kind of this mosaic. What about things that are counterfeited of regal issues? That's certainly circulated in North America in the time period that people normally associate. Are those to be included? This is more about where they were made. Here's I talked about some of the different states that issued. In fact, all the 13 states issued paper money. Here's a North Carolina note. Here's something from the quote-unquote mother country. The Virginia halfpence. Totally interesting. They were minted in the Tower Mint in England for the specific purpose of circulating in Virginia, in the colony of Virginia. More Spanish silver in the middle on the left here. We have counterfeits on the bottom left, a counterfeit farthing. So on the bottom right, I mentioned private enterprise. There's a so-called Nova Constellatio that there's debates even today. Where was that minted? There's more of a consensus than there used to be. But these are some of the things that people classify in their own minds, as colonials. Here's some more variety. Here's on the top left more Spanish silver, a 1768 8 real. We have a Portuguese coin. We have a French. We have another piece of continental currency, a beautiful piece that has a lot of symbolism to the 13 colonies. So we have certainly things that come from different countries, from different colonies, from in the case of Fujio's, the Continental Congress authorizing something. So I've posed a lot of questions. Here's really the answer. All the above are recognized as by not only C4, the Colonial Coin Collectors Club, but collectors in general. It's kind of a consensus that all of these fit under the general large tent of American colonials, both coins and currency. And a collection can include any of the wide variety that I've only given you a taste of. I haven't even shown you the full variety. These slides have just given you a taste or are intended to give you a flavor of the variety that's out there, coins, tokens, and currency. And as it says on the slide, it's really only limited to your imagination. So if I were to go around to C4 and ask each person to stand up and say what they collected, every single person would say something different. Most everybody collects more than one thing, and some people collect really focus on. Some people collect things that predominantly circulated here, but were made in Europe. So I know a collector who focuses on almanacs. And the great thing about almanacs of the period is they had tables to show how merchants should value coins from different places. And so this person tries to collect everything in that table, because that table is a pretty good contemporary indication of what foreign coins circulated at that time. So that's just one creative way to collect. So one important question that we address here in this talk is, well, why should I collect colonials? What's special about colonials? Why are we in C4, as well as colonial coin collectors and currency collectors in general so excited about what we collect. And I think a lot of it is, well, first of all, to give you a flavor of why we're excited, here's a kind of a little test. I'm not going to ask you for the answers, but what coin, the answers will be coming. What coin was minted in Maryland? What is Paul Revere's connection to colonial currency? What coin was, and maybe you know some of these just from your knowledge you've acquired so far. What coin was authorized by the American Continental Congress but minted privately? What coins were most used in day-to-day commerce? I think Ray might have mentioned this privately in the chit-chat before we got going today. What coins were most used in day-to-day commerce in the colonies? And were counterfeit coins and currency, were they a problem? So, and this is just a flavor of some of the questions that come up historically. There's something called Chalmers tokens that are fairly rare, but a very interesting series. Paul Revere engraved some of the plates for the Massachusetts series of currency. And some of them are rarer than others and some of them more expensive than others, but the so-called codfish series, because there's literally a codfish at the top part of the engraving, which is a very important symbol in Massachusetts. And if you go to even today, if you go into the Massachusetts, I think either Senate or House of Representatives in the House, there's a big codfish as an homage to the fact that the cod industry was huge when the colony was founded, or in the early days of the colony. So the codfish, there's also the so-called Rising Sun series of notes that, Paul Revere, you can buy something and say, Paul Revere engraved the plates for this note. How exciting. Fujios, we talked about before, authorized by the Continental Congress, but minted privately by a man named James Jarvis. And I believe his facility was in Connecticut. What coins were used day to day? Counterfeit British halfpence, and I'm not sure what was number one and what was number two, but the two types of coinages that circulated the most in those times, let's say pre-federal mint, were, and probably to a large extent these coins circulated after the federal mint was established as well. We know that from contemporary sources, was counterfeit, both regal and mostly counterfeit British halfpence. They were minted in large quantities by many clandestine operations in England and Ireland probably, and shipped over here. And Spanish silver, 8 reals, 4 reals, 2 reals, one a half, that were minted in various mints, Lima, Peru, Mexico City, and that circulated probably, I think that I've read that in the northern half of the 13 colonies, probably more common to see the copper, the counterfeit halfpence, and probably if you were in the southern half of the 13 colonies, your mix would be probably more veering towards the Spanish silver. But that's what circulated the most. Counterfeiting was rampant, and it was a big problem, especially for merchants and for private individuals who got ripped off. Merchants got ripped off all the time, and there were times where merchants where there was kind of revolts over, where merchants wouldn't take the lighter halfpence. Sometimes there was such a need for it, they passed anyway, just because there was a desperate need for coinage. Britain wasn't interested in making life any easier with the mercantilism policies they had. They didn't care whether there was enough circulating coinage in North America. So sometimes, especially in certain areas, you kind of had to make do. A combination of bartering, taking lighter halfpence than met the standard, and which means someone was getting ripped off oftentimes. So those are some reasons why we should collect colonials. Really, what these questions have in common is love of history, love of knowing what was life like in earlier American times when our great country was being founded and being developed, how did they affect life, and also we'd love to see the inscriptions, the legends on them, because they really tell us what was important. Like E Pluribus Unum you find on New Jersey coppers. That tells us the values and the priorities of our society at that time. So we've gone over, the fact that there's a large variety of things and they're all considered colonial and different people collect in different ways. So the question I think for individuals like yourselves is, well, what should I collect? And there's no answer, no immediate answer, because what you're going to do is go through a period of discovery, and certain things will appeal to you, and certain things, for whatever reason, won't appeal to you. And the other thing that'll happen is if you decide to stay with colonials, to do more than dabble, as time goes on, things that may not have appealed to you at first, you learn more about them, and you think, wow, I didn't really think about this before, but this is a really cool series of coins. There are many ways to collect, but I'm just going to go over, and as I said before, there are many ways to collect as there are collectors. I'm just going to go over some of the more common ways to collect. So probably the most common types of ways to collect involve the so-called state coinages. So as you may know, New Jersey, Connecticut, Mass, and Vermont. Vermont wasn't as one of the 13 colonies. Vermont was a republic. In fact, the first Vermont coin say res publica. Vermont res publica, which means the Republic of Vermont. It wasn't a state. It very much wanted to become the 14th state, and eventually did. But these four places, New Jersey, Connecticut, Mass, and Vermont, they minted their own coins. Now, they did it different ways. Massachusetts established its own mint. New Jersey, Connecticut, and Vermont authorized the coinage, but private individuals contracted with the state or republic to mint the coins. But you can just start off with, hey, I just want one coin from each of these four places: New Jersey, Connecticut, Mass, Vermont. If I get one, then that's pretty cool, and that's a great way to start. In fact, if that's all you do, because you're collecting other things, well, that's great. But there's kind of an order that gets kind of more and more involved and more intense. So you may get a one from New Jersey and say, wow, I've noticed that all these New Jerseys don't look alike. Or Vermonts. Gee, some of these Vermonts have this landscape design, some of the Vermonts have a bust design, and then you have this baby head design. So some people start to look at major types. Some people say, if I just get one from each date, if I get a 85, an 86, an 87, and an 88 Vermont, that's fine, that's all I need. Or similar with New Jersey and so forth. Mass is just 87 and 1887 and 1888. Some people just do it that way and stop, and that's fine. That's great, because again, the kind of mantra here is what appeals to you, what interests you, and the great thing about any type of hobby is it's yours. No one's going to tell you how to do it. It's one of the few places in life that you make it completely yours, and you decide what gives you pleasure and how you want to do it. We were talking about major types, like for example, let's talk about the New Jersey series. You may have noticed, most of them are the horse head faces right. Sometimes there's three varieties where the horse head faces left. So those are avidly collected. They're naked eye variety. They're very different, and we don't really know why the engravers and the designers made some of the varieties with the head facing left. No one knows, and that's, to me, and I think to many collectors, that's part of the charm and part of the interest. Some people do a so-called red book typeset. So you just go through the red book and you try to get, except for maybe very expensive ones that are very, very hard. When you're starting out, you may want to be satisfied with a red book typeset. You may be at first satisfied with a red book typeset and then become dissatisfied because you're interested and it's not enough. And that a lot of people go down the so-called rabbit hole and they start doing one thing and then they get more interested. I see someone there smiling. So that's great. So these are suggestions of ways to start, and then it's going to lead you to where it leads you. Some people do variety collecting. So as it says in the slide, there are more than 140 New Jersey varieties. Now many are very rare. So if you get to 80 or 90, you're doing really well. And there's kind of a club of people who have got to 100. But you just kind of start collecting varieties and you see where it goes. And for example, on the back of New Jerseys, there are many different kinds of shields. Some are skinny and puny, some are wide. I find that very interesting. There's many different types of because there were 3 mints in different engravers, among other reasons, you look at the very various varieties, the horse head looks very different and on different varieties. As a beginner, and to this day, as someone who's not a beginner anymore, I find that charming and I find it cool. So you can start with the more elementary ways of collecting, and then kind of drill down and start collecting varieties. You can set a goal for yourself, or not. It's up to you individually. You may say, let me just see where this goes. I'll start getting varieties, and I'll see. And you may then start to say, I got 20, or I got 25 or 30. Let me see, try to get to 40, and there you are. So you go as far as it's interesting to you. Some people, including me, really get interested in a variety, and they collect by die state. So, you have varieties formed by the different dyes, and a dye marriage forms a variety. But, with the use of the dye, the pounding and the fact that maybe the steel used was substandard, maybe the process to make make the steel into a dye, the annealing process and so forth, the heating, the cooling, maybe it wasn't done optimally, or for a lot of other reasons, maybe it was just pressed into use and used a long time. Cracks form, laminations, all kinds of stuff happens, especially because this is 1780s technology. So we're not talking about, today, we're talking about then. And, what kind of steel they could get and what their manufacturing process was. You have all kinds of, varieties that sometimes little pieces of the dye falls out, or cracks form, or all kinds of things happen. Some people find that really interesting. And if you have a series of coins where you can know, well, the crack's bigger, or now there's a piece that fell out, or whatever, that even though it's 200 and something years later, for a fact that this coin was minted before this coin, which was minted before this coin. And if there's 5 die states, maybe you want to get all 5. Now, that's advanced collecting. I do that with certain varieties that I'm very interested in. I actually just wrote for C4 Newsletter a paper on a certain Vermont variety that had a series of more and more advanced die states. So that's me, and some people get into that, but that's just a suggestion, because some of the die states are very dramatic, and you see just all kinds of cracks and things happening. And some people find that very cool. So just, again, more ideas of how to collect. You can collect paper currency. You can collect one, and this is what I'm doing, one from each colony. So let's say you get interested in colonial paper money. You could collect one or more from the series of Continental Congress issued. You could get one from each emission. They have different emissions, each with a different date. You could get either one for each year, or advance to one for each admission. You could get, now looking at the states, you can get one from each of the 13 states. Some states more plentiful and more easy to come by. Some states like Georgia, a little more expensive, harder to come by, a little more of a challenge. But the fact that it's a challenge, if it's too easy, it wouldn't be fun, because you want a challenge. Some people collect counterfeits, and there's many ways to collect counterfeits, because there's been a lot of study in recent years, and there's certain, these are the counterfeits that were mostly made. There's a Machen Mill series of counterfeits that were made in Newburgh, New York, but there's also, most of the counterfeits were made in Britain by, and of course they're making counterfeits, they're doing something illegal, so they're not keeping great records of what they did, so we're trying to piece it together, and researchers have now made different families of ones that have a lot in common. So you could go down that rabbit hole, or just collect, a few, or you could have a British counterfeit British halfpence, counterfeit British farthing, counterfeit Irish halfpence, counterfeit Irish farthing. Many ways to start off and get a nice little variety set, and then see if it interests you. Washingtonia. A lot of, there's an advanced collection being auctioned around the corner, Sid Martin's collection, a lot of different types. George's Triumpho, which was minted in 1783, and then there were ones there were a bunch of medals and things that were minted after Washington's death to commemorate him. Cobs are a whole other area. Cobs were earlier. You have the milled Spanish coinage, but earlier you have mints in Spanish, Central and South America that were making just crude kind of shaped, and you may have seen these, really crude shaped coinage, 8 reals and the different denominations below. again, this is just some eye candy, as I call it, to illustrate kind of what I'm talking about. So here's an example of a sample typeset for Vermont Coppers. You have the 1785 landscape, which is very popular with collectors. It's really cool. And we have the so-called baby head, the bottom left. We have the bust left, the bust right. So, type collecting, and this is true with Connecticut's also. Some people get a lot of pleasure out of, getting, the bust is facing left, the bust is facing right on the obverse. The bust is mailed, or it's, the different dressings on the bust. So either drapery or mailing. So here's an example of a 6-coin typeset. And again, they started. How interesting! They started off with the landscape design. Probably what happened was people were questioning it. It looked different, so they went to a design that was would be more familiar to people, more evocative of British halfpence. So they went to the bust coinage. Here's some examples of someone forming a typeset with paper money. Here are examples from some of the different colonies, and you see the variety of denominations, in shillings and pence, because that was the type of denominations that circulated, that people knew. And you can see the variety of designs and the variety of anti-counterfeiting devices and legends. So to me, and I've gone down a rabbit hole in colonial currency endlessly. You could just collect that and go down that rabbit hole and get a lot of pleasure. People ask, well, how rare are colonials? And if you've come from the early U.S. world, or even later U.S., you kind of have a sense of some varieties are rarer than others. Variety, again, we're talking about dye marriages. And this is the chart that we use, and from R5 to R1, typically that's where, especially when you're beginning, you might find something that's only R5, only 31 to 75 known. That means known. These numbers aren't set in stone. Sometimes, maybe 10 years ago, a certain variety might be called an R5, but then more are seen, more are known than the initial researchers were aware of. Before you know it, these are only estimates. When you see that something, these are never set in stone. Some are more, there's much more of a consensus than others. But after a while, sometimes these are adjusted up or down because of researchers get a better sense of what's out there. But, we don't know we don't know all the collectors. We don't know what people have squirreled away. So things sometimes appear, and you think, gee, I only thought there were 10 of those known, but all of a sudden now there's 12 or 13 known. So that happens sometimes. But here's kind of a sense of the very rare varieties are unique down to R1, plentiful. Now, though plentiful means you're not going to find it in change, but plentiful is a relative concept. Means, an R1, it means if you go to a coin show like this, or if you hunt on various websites, it won't be too difficult for you to come up with an R1. And then at that point, you're thinking of quality. I want a little bit nicer one. Are colonials expensive? And the short answer is I can't give you a short answer. It's yes or no. It really depends. You could have a 1776 continental dollar, which may not be so much as research and people are thinking differently about those now. Maybe not expensive as they once were, but still expensive. You could have you could buy. I bought an item yesterday for $100. It was a piece of colonial currency, and the reason I bought it was it was very worn, and someone had put backing on it, which they used to do sometimes in those days, and the backing came from an old German almanac. So I found that incredibly interesting, and that's part of what I collect. So $100, I came away with something, and it evidence that it probably had been sewn. It probably ripped. The sewing wasn't working, and they had to back it. So for $100, I got something that I think is extremely interesting. But then there are, you could find in auctions or on the bourse floor things that are, 5-figure, 6-figure. I mean, there's a lot of very expensive coins that most people, including myself, will never own, but I still would enjoy looking at. So a lot of different price points, price ranges, and as you collect more, based upon your budget and your predilections, you'll settle into an area that meets your budget needs and meets your numismatic happiness needs. Some more eye candy. These are called Nova Borax. These were not authorized by the state of New York, but Nova Borax is a Latinized version of New York. And we think we know who minted them, and we don't know exactly where, but we think we have some ideas. That mystery, I think, adds to their charm. So I put these in because it says one of Jim's favorites. I collect these, and I really love these. But everybody finds what's interesting to them. So this is a really important topic. What books are available on Colonials? Because just like large cents, or let's say you collect bust half dollars, whatever you're collecting, or fractionals, paper money, whatever you're collecting, you're going to want to get the reference book. You're going to want to learn about it, because what happens is it's kind of a spiral. You see some and you get really interested, and you read more and you learn more. Well, the more you read, the more interested. If it's for you, it may not be for you, and that's fine too. You go somewhere else in the hobby, and you find another area. But if it's starting to be interesting to you, then reading about it is going to make you want to collect more, and then collecting more, you're going to want to know more. So there's kind of that dance that goes. And as in my 20 years of collecting, my knowledge level has really gone up, and as it has, I've noticed that I'm having more and more fun. The more I know about the coins I see in dealers' cases, or that I read about in C4 newsletter, the more fun I'm having. Now that I know what I'm talking about, and I can have a conversation with an advanced collector and really get a better sense of what they're talking about, and there's not some like behind the black curtain and what are they talking about, or what do those terms mean, and when I'm starting to really get it, a lot more fun. So you want to think about, and it says a handout, I don't have that list with me. On the C4 website, I think we're going to be putting up a list, so you want to check with that, and that's in something we're going to be working on. But you can look at the C4 newsletter, the C4 website, www.colonialcoins.org, and there's a page on our library. And you can look at our library and get a sense of what some of the books are. But for any series, let's say Vermont or Connecticut's, I'm going to embarrass Mr. Randy Clark right here, sitting in the blue jacket here, who's looking down at the floor. And I hope you don't mind if I just point out that he just wrote a very well received work on that was long in progress of Connecticut copper coins. Because remember before, previous slide, Connecticut was one of the states that minted their own coins. It's a real tour de force, a lot of incredible information in there, both historical and looking at information on each variety, and there's over 360 varieties. So if you want to collect Connecticut's, that's a book you want to look at. So there's books like that for not every series, but almost every series, and there's key catalogs. So if you join C4, we have a lending library. So that's a great way to get your feet wet and kind of look at some books and say, hey, do I want to try to acquire this? I will say that some books are hard to come by because they're out of print and so you can't just order them. Like Tony Carlotto is a man who wrote a book on Vermont. And it's a great book, but they sold out a few years ago, more than a few years ago. And you can find them online. You can find them sometimes used copies or what have you. But it's a challenge to find them. So sometimes that is the case. But forming a colonial library is going to be really important. Finding the resources. And if I could embarrass my friend Ray Williams here in the front row, who's looking to the floor, tomorrow at 10:30, I think in this room. I'm not sure though. I think it's in this room. Ray is going to give a talk called Forming a Colonial Library. So I'm only just delving into this topic very briefly and just letting you know that this is something. Ray is going to talk in detail about this very topic tomorrow at 10:30. So if you're thinking about colonials and you're thinking, well, I think I will want to form even a basic colonial library, which means kind of some basic reference books, some basic catalogs. There are both books that are general about colonials as a whole, and then there are specialized books about various series. And then there are catalogs. If you want to learn more about that, Ray is the man to talk to, and he will be right here at 10:30, so I would highly recommend that if you're interested in that. And I'm just to finish the slide, the ANA has colonial books in its lending library if you're an ANA member, which is a great idea. C4, if you join C4, which I would highly recommend, if only for the C4 newsletter as well as the ability to meet other collectors, and that's also a very important way that I know I and many others have gotten beyond the very basic stage and have started to learn, because a lot of this is experiential learning. Talking about other people, looking at coins together. So C4 has a lending library, which I highly recommend. So those are some ways to think about forming a library and to go online to some online resources, to always be trying to learn as an adjunct to your physical collecting activities. Grading colonials. Well, it's a kind of a little bit of a nuanced topic. So different areas of the hobby have different ways they grade. So if you're talking about mercury dimes, you're talking about in high grades, do the bands separate, or in medium grades, you're looking at the amount of detail on the Winged Liberty's wing. Every series has its own ins and outs. EAC, if you're collecting early large cents and half cents, they kind of have their way they collect. They grade. They have a details grade, and then they have a net grade with a lower number. It could be, to reflect different things about the coin. So if you had a very detailed coin that was an XF45, but maybe it has some little bit of corrosion, it might be net VF30. That's EAC grading. Every once in a blue moon, I see people trying to grade colonials that way. But in the main, in general, as a generalization, the way you most often see colonials graded is not the net grading of EAC. It's simply a grade for wear, and then descriptive language to capture anything else about the coin. So it might be you may have a fine 15. New Jersey coin, but you want to note that it may have the surfaces might have a touch of corrosion, or it has an edge nick, or it has a scratch on the back, or maybe it has pristine surfaces. So that's typically how I've seen colonials graded. But as the slide says, it's not easy. It takes experience. It's experiential, as I said before. It's just a matter of just looking at a lot of different coins and seeing how other people grade them. One great way to get a sense of grading is look at catalogs. Auction catalogs with a lot of colonials in them, I find to be, and many other people find them to be, really a great source of learning, because you see the people that are the catalogers of those catalogs, they're experts. They've been doing this for years. So you see how, especially if the coin is plated, if the coin is pictured there, you see how that cataloger cataloged that coin. Now, you don't have to agree with that catalog, or you may come up with your own grade. And this happens all the time. That's overgraded, or sometimes if you're lucky, that's undergraded. Wow, this is really an AU50. I don't understand why they call this an XF. Maybe the person didn't know as much about the series as I've learned, because now I've studied and I've been really focusing on it, and I know that there's certain reasons why that doesn't struck up as well. So the grade that even the experts give in the catalog, you're not obligated to agree, but it's a great place to start out to see how the catalogers agree, how they grade. So you want to look at a lot of coins. You want to look at catalogs. You want to, if you get to know other collectors, talk to them. One great thing you want to do is learn about the series, learn about the ins and outs. Whether something is that these coins, a lot of them come weak on the back. You'll hear, that's that variety. The back, the reverse often comes weak. So that's important information to know to assess the grade. One last thing I would say is, there's a book that I would highly recommend. It's the Grading Guide to Early American Copper, and most of it is about grading early U.S. large cents and half cents. But there's a chapter on grading. Well, first of all, there are chapters on grading, and one chapter written by our own, if I could embarrass him again, Ray Williams. Chapter 4 is a whole chapter dedicated toward, just with a lot of pictures, that's dedicated just towards grading colonials. So that's a great resource. I use that sometimes, and it's again, you're not obligated to agree with that opinion, to agree with what you see in the book. But if you can get that book, that's another great way to do it, to learn about and develop your skills in grading colonials. But it's difficult. It takes a little bit of a learning curve, but it's a lot of fun too. I talked before about there's not a net grade, but there's you grade a colonial by the amount of wear, and then you note any issues. So you may have things that either detract from the value or don't detract from the value. So the plancher cutter mark, why is that? That's something that was a kind of an error done at the mint. So some people may find that gives the coin more value. Some people may not like it, and that's not for them. It's an individual taste. Top right clip. So a lot of times, end of the strip of copper, plancher cutters, a little bit clipped off. That's mint made. So most people won't think of that as a detraction, as something that takes away from the value. Some people might not want that. Or if the clip takes off an important piece of a legend, a part of a letter, that might make the coin less desirable. So up to you. So you have the bottom left weak date. That could be because of wear. That could be because of strike. And again, as I mentioned before, getting to look. If you're interested in a variety, the best thing to do is look at either online in catalogs, on the bourse floor at a show. Try to see, or your friends who have that variety. Try to see other coins and get a sense of, well, how do they come? How do they look? You may have a coin that after you gain a lot of knowledge, you think, wow, this is it doesn't look like much. But once I see the other coins, I know, wow, that's a pretty good example of this variety. I might not even be able to do much better. That's really good, as opposed to, wow, that's a very worn coin. That doesn't look very good. But only the knowledge you gain will allow you to make those kind of decisions. So I want to give some quick tips for buying colonials. And if you're already a coin collector and you've been collecting in other areas, this stuff is kind of intuitive and you know it already. But it's worth saying. So I think I've implied some of this or said some of this. You want to before you make any substantial purchase, become knowledgeable. Don't make a substantial purchase, then learn and say, I really should have waited because now I see better examples for the money, or even, I'd be willing to spend more money because I see they come a lot better, but I didn't know that when I bought the coin. So, explore a little bit before making a substantial purchase is always, I think, the best advice. Shopping around again is part of that. Especially at the beginning. Part of that process. Buy as much as you can. Just buy from the knowledgeable, well-known dealers, and you can maybe talk to other collectors or other folks. Talk to people at C4 to get a sense of who they are. Get to know some dealers. Each dealer has their own way of doing things. So some dealers might say, this is my price, and just like any other area of collecting. Some dealers say, this is my price and that's it. Other dealers, they give you a price, but they're willing to maybe talk a little bit about the price. So you get to know the dealer and how to best deal with that dealer. You want to be obviously as polite as possible to them. You want to get to know them and really be polite to them, be nice to them, because they're going to be your friend down the road. As you deal with them. Let the right coin come to you, I think is kind of implied. Don't get that caught up on grade. So if a dealer has a coin that's $500 and you say, no, that's not the grade, I think it's a wrong grade. Well, if you agree on the price, if you're okay with the price, or you talk them down to a price that is acceptable to you, don't haggle over the grade. Really, the grade doesn't, at that point, the grade doesn't matter. You can mark it any way you want. like in many types of coins, many places to find Colonials. Dealers here at the show, they're listed in the C4 newsletter. There are C4 and other auctions that have lots of Colonials in them. You want to look at the Stacks and Heritage and Goldberg. Those are 3 websites, 3 auction companies. You want to be familiar with their websites. You want to go to your local show, regional and national shows. Not as many coin shops as in the past. We want to look at them. You want to try to, try to get to know what the websites are that have Colonial coins. Some dealers have websites, some don't. Some have them, but they don't update them. eBay, caveat emptor. You already know this if you know anything about eBay. Really be careful with eBay, okay? Especially if it's a substantial purchase or more, on the upper end of what you're comfortable spending. You got to be really careful there. Some people get great finds there. They cherry pick stuff, but they know what they're doing, and it's caveat emptor. So very quickly, I know I'm a little bit late here. I just want to say that. There's no right answer. Should I buy certified Colonials or should I buy raw Colonials? It's up to you. There's no right answer. Really, it's pros and, what I tell people is there are pros and cons to both. Most Colonial collectors like me have both in their collection. I have probably 90% raw. I like raw. And I have 10% slab. Why? Because if I buy a coin out of a big name sale, I want to keep that coin in that slab. Newman or Patrick, for example. But I love the raw coin. I love taking it out. I love looking at it, weighing it, brushing it. I enjoy it that much more than if it's entombed in plastic. But for a lot of reasons, slabs are a great idea too for holding the value of the coin, especially if it's a really high a grade that you think is advantageous. Some people break them out and try to submit them to get a better grade. But so there's a lot of reasons to have it in slabs that are very good reasons. There are a lot of good reasons to have raw. I would not talk you in or out of either one. It's personal preference. But one caveat is never ever take as gospel what's stated on if it's with the the holder on. One time I want to use it. Oh, here it is. So the holder here for the currency or the slab. Every once in a while there are slabs that misattribute what's inside it. The grade might be wrong. Other details. I have a coin that they just said something on it. It was a double struck coin. They just completely said something wrong. They said something about it being struck in the collar or something. Totally wrong. It was New Jersey copper. But so whatever this on the slab. Buyer beware. Quickly, how do you care? So let's say you have raw or non-certified. What do you do? And that's why, and I invite you afterwards to come up for the show and tell. I would go, there's a chapter in that book about grading early copper. There's a chapter, it might be chapter 1 on that covers a lot of what I'm going to say about caring for coins. But typically, what you don't want to do. Let's start with don't do. Don't keep it in something in one of these that has PVC, right? I don't keep anything in plastic, but supposedly the ones that are brittle, hard do not have it. The ones that are soft do have it. I don't trust either. I just don't keep it in these. Most all Colonial collectors that have slabbed, i.e. raw, I meant to say non-slabbed or raw Colonial coins, you keep it in one of these cotton liners, and you keep the cotton liner in an envelope. Simple as that. I know a collector who keeps it in jeweler's tissue, folded in jeweler's tissue, and keeps it in the envelope. And then on the envelope, you write what's important. You write the provenance of the coin, the weight if you know it, obviously the date, the variety, anything interesting about the coin. There might be something, dice date or other information. So the grade. That's what you'll see with the non-slabbed coins. So that's as far as carrying with them. You're going to want to brush them every once in a while, get off the impurities. You should not let years go by without brushing them. So, and sometimes, you can take blue ribbon or acetone. Some people, a little bit advanced, they brush it with one of these substances to care for the coin. It removes the grease, it removes kind of impurities from it. So those are, and I want to talk about that. Time won't allow to go into detail, but chapter, I think it's 1 of, but in that grading early copper book that I referred to before, they go into that in detail. So what supplies and equipment? Well, I'll just very briefly say, you know this from, you're probably all collectors that collect other things. If you have an unslabbed coin, never hold it over a table, over something that's hard. It only takes 1 second for it to slip. You didn't mean it to slip. You were talking to someone, slips out of your hand, boom, hits the thing. Don't let that happen to you. But it happens to all of us sometimes. Hold it over a soft surface. Have one of these line trays, or even, they come out, even just a pad. Have something soft to hold it over always. If you're at home, something soft, sometimes on my bed I'll have it, so if it falls on something that's not going to hurt the coin. You're going to want to have the brush, these things, the liners, the envelopes, and you're going to want to, these are expensive. The Bosch & Lomb 5X loops. There's a lot of different ones. There are very expensive, very nice ones. There are medium price ones. So you want to explore what's out there. But I have one of these, and many that's all you need. So those are the things you're going to want to have. Some people have a digital scale to weigh, because for a lot of reasons, you want to know, especially in certain types of coins like counterfeits, you're going to want to know what the weight of the coin is. Final slide, a word about security. Again, this is intuitive. You all know this from collecting in other areas of coins. Every moment that your coin is out of the bank or out of your house, you have to treat it in a certain way. You're never going to want to, for example, keep coins in a bag you're carrying. You want to keep coins on your person, in your pocket. No one can get at it. You're not going to leave it somewhere and forget about it. And that, if you're flying, that's, never want to let it off your person if you're flying. If you're at a hotel, you got to think, is this a hotel where I feel safe putting it in the hotel safe? But you really want to think about, and never leave coins in your car, even for a minute, even to go in and get a sandwich or stop to go to the bathroom. So you got to think about every moment when you're outside, when you have the coin outside the bank or outside your house, security. And if you have questions, ask other collectors what they do and how they deal with that issue. Another bit of eye candy, a beautiful Vermont copper landscape from 1785, one of my favorite coins. And some ways to find other collectors through our club, through EAC. I think you all heard of the American Numismatic Association, American Numismatic Society. These are all ways to meet other collectors, to learn more, and to have a lot of fun in the hobby. Of course, Baltimore, the Whitman show here, and other big shows. There's the Fun Show in Florida, regional shows, their websites. So these are ways to find other collectors. And that's my presentation, and we have a little bit of time left over for questions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, if there are any. So,
where is the C4? Where are they at, or is it nationwide?
Nationwide. So we're a national coin club. We're incorporated in New Jersey, but we don't have a place. So most of our collectors are on the East Coast, but we gather. Our big annual gathering is right here in Baltimore in the fall. So this is our convention. Our convention consists of, like last night, we had educational programs, C4 auction. We have a C4 table you might have seen down on the Bourse floor. We have a newsletter we send out to members. We have a lending library. And so that's where C4 lives. There's also a Google group. You don't have to be a member of C4, but there's a Google group for Colonial coins, and there are other places where people online gather, collectors gather. But and so we kind of communicate through the Google group. We communicate through the newsletter. Yeah. Any other questions?
The C4 table is 711 on the Bourse floor.
Okay, good. 7-Eleven.
And there's some nice exhibits
Yes, yes. Oh, good point. Yeah, we have exhibits there every year, and we have some very interesting exhibits there this year as well.
7-Eleven's easy to remember.
7-Eleven.
Yeah.
Question?
I'm looking at a raw coin, which is, by its nature, it's hundreds of years old. I mean, the more you go on, I mean, is there a way, do you know how, versus general wear versus when, if you were to have a slab, you know it's gonna come back and say, details, environmental damage?
Yeah.
Do you come to know, the difference when looking at a coin?
So I've found, and others are free to give an answer. I've found that there's inconsistency in the grading, third-party grading services, depending on who's doing the grading. Colonials is a specialized area, and they don't always know the details. So in general, as a generalization, if you have visible, some little bit of corrosion or something, the surfaces you could tell aren't quite smooth, then you could predict probably it'll come back that way. But it's not consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the best answer I can give.
It's not always important. Sometimes the surfaces are kind of as made, granulars, what they call them. Some slab houses will say it's environmental corrosion. Others will say that's as made.
Yeah.
One of the things early collectors used to paint the variety on the obverse so that they would never have to figure out what it was. And the slab houses will body bag that and say it's graffiti. So sometimes you don't kind of know. Colonials are hard for the slab houses to do with the consistency
Yeah.
that they do with federal.
They've done a fair to middling to sometimes subpar job. It's really, the best defense is trying to learn as much as possible. Sure.
On that one slide, you had the different examples. One of them had the green, I guess it was.
First green.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I
That's,
posted that.
obviously, that's corrosion. How do you keep that from occurring?
So
Yeah.
once it's occurred because if you, let's say you very carefully, some people use like maybe a rose thorn or something I've heard. If you take it out, well, you'll have a pit
Yeah.
because there's been a pit formed by that corrosion. So most people just leave it alone. It's just best to leave it alone, I think.
There's a way to keep it from spreading. 'Cause I've
Um,
heard it spreads.
Well, it's usually stable. Actually, I'm not seeing corrosion that's continuing to corrode if you keep the environment of the way you're storing the coin.
No. You want to make sure that's a dry environment. You want to keep it in one of these type of things. In a slab, a very, very little, that's not a vacuumed airtight thing. A little tiny little bit of air will get in even a slab. I wouldn't assume, oh, it's slab, air can't get to it. General is not going to spread. I'm not aware of, I agree with Randy, I'm not aware of them spreading. You want to kind of, brush every once in a while and care for it and keep it in a dry environment.
Well, what I think he's referring to is what you see in ancient coins very often, not very often, but often, called bronze disease. And it
Yeah,
will
that's-
spread. You need to stabilize the coin. You need to treat it with
The
still
o-
water, clean it off. There's a
Oh,
lot of
interesting.
sulfuric acid in the atmosphere is one of the big killers for copper.
The only thing that I'm aware of that type of thing in the colonial area, there's a series made of coins made of tin called American plantation tokens, and there's something called tin pest that spread. But with copper, I'm not really aware of something like that. Yeah. By the way, before I forget, C4 has put together, and we've been out at shows and stuff, and it's at our C4 table. We put together a wonderful front and back kind of summary of colonial coins. Keep this with you and read it. This is another cool way to kind of get a sense of what's available in the colonial sphere. So please pick these up. Please, if you want, you can look at the show and tell here. Any last questions?
Just please be careful of cables up here when you're walking.
Yeah.
No way to avoid it, I'm sorry, but just watch when you're walking.
Yeah,
Well, thank-
Who laid those out, Ray? In such a.
I don't know, something. When I was younger and I could crawl on the floor, I could do a neater job.
Well, thanks very much for your time and attention. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.